So, as what usually happens with American politics, it starts to infect British politics and British way of life. Whereas last week I was covering the Black Lives Matter riots that we have seen in America, this week I'm going to cover the protests we see in London. I was originally going to call them riots, but for those of you that saw Laughing at the Guardian last night, We Got a Problem was on and put what a London riot actually is in perspective. And from what I can see from the protests, I can't in good conscience call them riots, but I can still criticise them for being violent. So I think the first thing to do is to cover just how large these crowds in these protests are. As you can see here, it's quite a large crowd. They have completely filled up. I'm not exactly sure where the space is, but I believe it's just outside Parliament. It is a huge space, and we are easily seeing well over the 6 people we're allowed to see outside on a regular basis. Now this has annoyed quite a few people, me as well, because we're not allowed outside and we're not even allowed to attend funerals of those that have died. A family friend's mother unfortunately lost her life, and the best we could do for the funeral was stand outside the house, socially distance, and we couldn't even interact with them. Just wave from afar or, show condolences however we could. But then we have a crowd size like this, and there has been an awful lot of people saying do not blame these protests if there is a second spike when it comes to COVID-19. And their whole basic reasoning of it is that they are protesting for human rights, as if that has anything to do with a global pandemic that we're apparently seeing right now. But I've always been fairly sceptical of the lockdown, so in my case anyway, I can use it as an example of how we overreacted to it. However, this is blatant hypocrisy and not really what I want to go through. I want to go through how these protests are not exactly the most peaceful ones I've seen in my life. As I mentioned a lot on this channel, I helped out with the Daniella March for his freedom, organised by Not So Obvious, and he did an outstanding job, as I always say. But that protest was incredibly civil. We were very civil with the police. We had criticisms of them, sure, but we were very polite and civil with them. We didn't cause any major problems, if any problems at all. But then we get to these large-scale Black Lives Matter protests, and there is a surplus of things getting out of hand. And, well, that's exactly what we're going to go through today. So, instead of beating around the bush, I may as well show you. Here's the first clip.
I the jinx are getting fucked up. I the dashing, they're dashing. I the jinx are dashing. I suck your dad. I the jinx are dashing. I suck your mum. Suck your mum. Oh my knees! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Won't stop! Won't stop! Oh shit!
Yes, you just witnessed 2 police officers getting harassed by a rather large group of quote-unquote protesters until they eventually get assaulted and one of them gets punched in the face. Of course, when it comes to a question of optics, it looks absolutely awful, but these people don't seem to care. But some people would argue that this is one isolated incident, and to that I say, watch these other clips.
Take you now to London, where thousands of people are gathering in protest as we go to air. And Europe correspondent Ben Avery has more. Ben, there have just been some clashes with police. What's happening where you are?
Guys, there's actually a bit of a clash with us here at the moment, and okay guys, so what's happened, we've been trying to walk away from the danger here, but it's been following us. The police
Goodness me, I mean, this just goes to show.
News! On the news today!
Okay, I mean, that just goes to show how dangerous it is for our reporters, for all journalists on the street at the moment trying to cover these riots when emotions are running so high. It's good to see you've got police there now.
You get the idea there. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't like the media as much as the next person, but I have never advocated for directly attacking them when they are actually reporting. Doing what Sargon of Akkad did during his MEP campaign was probably the best thing we could do. Get up on stage, call them all liars, call them out for what they are, as being dirty, dirty smear merchants. Now, this clip of the Australians isn't necessarily fake news, I'm not saying that, but don't worry, we'll get into some fake news later. But for now, we have one final clip of the first day of protests. Yes, this is absolute pure chaos. I don't exactly know what they expect Boris Johnson to do about George Floyd's death, given that it was in a completely different country and he has absolutely no power or responsibility over the fact George Floyd died. But as we can see, there is certainly a section, at least, of people who went out to the Black Lives Matter protest to cause nothing but havoc. And don't get me wrong, we saw the massive crowd at the start. That was the mostly peaceful part of the protest from what I could see. But for most normies out there, if they see these clips, they are just going to assume that Black Lives Matter is a violent movement. Because how can you ignore this? But while the police are being attacked and aren't doing anything about Downing Street getting trashed, it's at least good to know that Hackney police are on the case. Hackney police. We were made aware of a racially offensive video circulating online. A 29-year-old male was arrested at an address in Essex earlier today on suspicion of a public order offence. He remains in custody at this time. I just can't believe it. There is video evidence of people attacking police and genuinely causing a public disturbance, but they still have time for this hate crime bullshit. There was a clip going around on Twitter of a black guy just beating the shit out of a white guy in the middle of London, while everyone around was just filming and not really helping. And then when the white guy got up, he was covered in blood, trying to walk away, and the black guy just comes behind and sucker punched him in the face. And as far as I can tell, there was no arrest there. But why are we wasting police resources, even in peaceful times, on hate crime? And yet, when there's still violent protests going on, and don't get me wrong, there is a lot of peaceful people there, sure, but there's a lot of people breaking the law here that we can see. But they're all completely ignored. But Hackney police just go off and arrest some guy for a racially offensive tweet or something. It's just ridiculous. Priscilla Dick needs to fucking go. Because honestly, the police doing nothing ends up escalating things because there is no deterrent to escalating these things. I mean, just look at this clip. This clip happened the day after. I mean, they don't even make arrests there. People in hoodies and are trying to cover their faces broke the barrier to try and get through and assault police officers. And there's no arrest made. They just throw them back into the crowd. Why are they letting them get away with this? I don't understand. And as I keep saying, it's not like it was the entire crowd trying to make their way to the police. Most of the crowd actually stepped back when things started getting out of hand. So this is what I mean. There is quite a lot of people there just for peaceful protests. It really does seem like some bad apples in the cases we've seen so far to get any chance they can to cause a bit of mayhem, basically. Having said that, for those that aren't being violent, they are very much up for vandalising sacred monuments to the UK.
I don't know about it.
I mean, again, in this clip, no one seems to be wanting to stop the vandalism or anything like that. Most people are there either just filming and not helping, or cheering it on actively. And the police there are doing absolutely nothing to help. A lot of them are just standing around, probably not wanting to cause a fuss, and the rest just seem to be politely asking people standing on the banisters or whatever they are, ask them politely to come down or something like that. There doesn't seem to be any will to enforce the law here. And again, we've been told for months that Dominic Cummings driving in his car at midnight to Durham was the worst thing that a public servant could ever do. And yet we have quite a few thousand people going into London, all protesting and huddling up against each other, basically. It's going to be an absolute petri dish of a protest. But, well, as we went through in Laughing at the Guardian last night, Dawn Butler doesn't believe that we should be blaming the people who are literally going to cause a second wave. Anyway, back to the graffiti and vandalism. Since the cenotaph and a lot of other landmarks in London were spray painted over, saying BLM with their classic marks, some people in London decided to go out and do their part in cleaning up Black Lives Matter's mess. And here's how Black Lives Matter generally reacted.
Couldn't even wait a day, not one day, because of their precious memorial.
When I saw you earlier, you picked up a sign. You all picked up signs and put them in bin bags.
Oh!
Why did you put them up? I don't understand.
So, spray painting. Hang on, I'm gonna get their faces in. Everybody say cheese.
Yeah, this is the exact way you should react to Karens like this. If anyone asks you why you're doing your part in being a civil, good citizen, step over. Just completely ignore them. Keep cleaning up after their shitty selves. Keep keeping our cenotaphs on our memorials clean, because we should honour the people who have made this country what it is. These war memorials are to our dead, and the people that don't even realise that the least racist country in the world is housing them, they don't care about that. They want more power. They want everything they can get from us. And as you could see in the clip, she tries to get the people's faces in. I mean, what does she expect people to react to? I want to give every single one of these people praise, but Black Lives Matter would probably call them all racists. I don't know. But the audacity and narcissism required to think that you are in the right for shaming people for cleaning up after them, it's absolutely ridiculous. And what are the police doing? Well, as we've seen in the clips, not too much, but some of them go way too far with trying to appease these people. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm for a police system that actually does get involved with the local community and makes good connections with them. But this is just ridiculous. Taking a knee to these people is an act of submission. You have no dignity when you do this. Men stand. They do not kneel to anyone except the Queen, of course. And, you know, your girlfriend if you're proposing to her, obviously. But you get the point. You should only kneel in very rare occasions of your life when there is something meaningful behind it. But kneeling like this to protesters? Why? You don't owe them anything. You are not subservient to them. Your job there is to arrest criminals and keep people out of Downing Street, but you're there taking a knee to these people. Why? Do you not have dignity, man? You need to grow a pair. Luckily, however, there are still some policemen with a backbone and who seem to be based and red-pilled.
Oh my god. Yo, what the fuck?
Black Lives Matter.
All lives matter.
No, all lives don't matter, sir. Black lives matter. Come on, thugs. Come on.
I mean, thank God he said all lives matter, but that reaction was very interesting. Not only does she say all lives don't matter, and then says Black Lives Matter, that really does insinuate that she is saying only Black Lives Matter. But if we're going to be charitable and say that's a Freudian slip, she then does challenge them to do something to her. She says, come on, thugs. I mean, what kind of behaviour is this? But things like this are why I think that the police are under very tight scrutiny to do absolutely nothing. Because if they do, they'll get called racist, and the more they get called racist, well, you get another Stephen Lawrence report. So anyway, we'll finally see some mounted police actually trying to do their job and disperse a rather violent crowd. I'm just going to let these next few clips play by themselves, because I think they tell their own story. Yes, in all these clips, they're all from the same scene, really. But the policemen are trying to disperse this crowd because they are becoming unruly, and the crowd is, well, throwing shit at them, and in one case you saw them throw a bike towards the horse. For what reason? Because I just want to cause mayhem from the looks of it. But for those of you that missed it, I will play a clip again in slow motion that shows just how dangerous this can be. Yeah, spooking a horse, believe it or not, makes it run off, and then it's got a mind of its own, and that will happen if you throw shit at it. And so while they're celebrating this police officer getting clotheslined by a traffic light, which I think is absolutely horrible and no one deserves that in their life, they don't realise that there are further consequences to their actions.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Oh my days, no!
Yes, when horses think they are in danger, they won't give a shit. They will run through anything that they can, and they can cause serious injury if you don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure both these people ended up in hospital, the police officer and the woman that got absolutely rammed by the horse. But of course, the classic people come out to play. Owen Jones's reaction to this was to basically say no one was throwing anything at the horses, and his final word on it was basically to say that we should not have police horses at protests. But this sort of thing is to be expected. I think the worst part of all this is the pure open gaslighting from the BBC. This was a tweet they sent out. They said, incredibly, 27 police officers injured during largely peaceful anti-racism protests in London. I mean, I'm at a loss for words, and I have said throughout this there were quite a few people who were there peacefully protesting, but that was the first 2 days. This has just been from yesterday. But when 27 police officers are being injured, I don't think you have any right to call them peaceful protests. 27 is quite a large number of officers for a peaceful protest. 1 police officer injured is a rather large number for a peaceful protest, for God's sake. But this is why it created quite a trend on Twitter. A lot of people are now quote-tweeting it, saying things like Paul Joseph Watson here. 2 skyscrapers knocked over during largely peaceful September flight. And then 1,500 drowned during largely successful maiden voyage of Titanic. Because it's the most oxymoronic statement you can say in your life. And yet, they are just openly gaslighting us. The BBC needs to be defunded, quite frankly. But, well, I suppose I should conclude. While the London protests were nowhere near the level that we saw from America, there is still absolutely no reason for these riots, and as far as I can tell, it just keeps confirming what we already know, that London police have absolutely no control of London. They are letting people get away with graffiti, they are letting people get away with violence in these quote-unquote peaceful protests. What can I say? Perhaps Enoch Powell had a point. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.